Well, hi, good morning. Thanks for joining me in my shop here. I'm going to be spending some time trying to fix the trigger on this scope. So this is definitely a challenge for me. Although by today's standards, this is a vintage scope, by the standards of my shop and the rest of the equipment in here, this is an ultra modern scope. And I'm sure I'm going to find it quite challenging to try to sort out what's wrong with it. And what is wrong with it? Well, it just will not trigger anymore. It doesn't seem to matter what I do with the trigger adjustments here. It will never trigger on a signal. So could it be I've been doing something wrong? It's always possible. I don't think it's very likely in this case, though. I've had the scope for a few years. It was sent to me by a very kind viewer. So thank you again, Mr. JP, for sending this to me. This has been my main go-to scope here in my shop. It's the most advanced one I have. But the trigger sensitivity has been going downhill since I got it, and finally it's reached the point where it just will not trigger on anything. So I'm a little frightened to go inside this and try to sort it out. I do have the manual. The manual is fairly extensive, of course. So, and I'm interested to look inside here, and maybe while I have it apart, I may go through some of the calibration adjustments or set up in it. Maybe. So, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set this up with a signal and see if it won't trigger. And then I'm going to use the manual to go through the testing procedure for the trigger. These are procedures you would follow to make sure it's operating. And maybe if I've been making some dumb mistake, I'll discover it at that point. But I don't think so. I think there's something wrong. Yeah, and what would be wrong? What would go slowly out of sorts to the point where it's too bad? I don't think it would be a transistor. Like a transistor, from my meager experience with repairing transistor equipment, it's either good or bad. I don't think there's too much in between. Could be wrong about that. Resistors drift high. Capacitors drift and leak over time. I think it's going to be a small component. There's probably a lot of them in there. How am I going to figure out which one it is? Step by step. That's how I plan to do it. Okay, so I let it warm up for a little bit here. The first thing I'm going to do is just put a sine wave on the scope coming from this signal generator here. And it's going to be a fair signal. There we are. This is running at, let's slow this down. I've got this going way too fast. Let's put this at, that's 5,000 hertz. There we are. A bit of dirt in this control. Or is it this? I think it was this control wiggling a bit. Okay, let's try and get this. Let me just speed it up a little bit. Let's try and get this to trigger. So I'll set the trigger source to normal. Coupling is AC. I'm not sure what this is all about. Trigger mode auto. We'll leave it there. Okay, will it trigger? Now if it triggers, I'll be very disappointed because I spent a lot of time getting this off my shelf this morning. But I don't think what I'm turning here is having any effect. Something is drifting. Probably the something's drifting. I don't know what. Could be the sweep, could be the signal generator. So that's the result there. Now we're in channel 1. So we'll flip this to channel 1. So now it's going to try to trigger on the channel 1 signal in particular. And I'm sure it's not going to do it. It's got a trigger light here. It's got a ready light. I don't know what that is. It has a trigger light here, which will come on when it tries to trigger, but it's not going to do it. Okay, so we're going to change this to normal. I'm just shooting in the dark now. I don't know what happened. screen. It went away completely. Put that to normal. Just shooting in the dark. Okay, and there's another setting down here, which is a single sweep. So we're not interested in that. Yeah, I think, well, we can put it on the line too. So now instead of trying to trigger on the signal, it's trying to trigger on the 60 cycle line, which you would hope would work, but there is no sign of any triggering going on. Could it just be dirt in these controls? I don't think so. I think that's very unlikely. Could it be some other setting that I'm just not clued into? Well, that's possible, but again, very unlikely. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the service manual, which I have, and there's a section on testing, the various functions, and I'm going to go through the section on testing the trigger, and we'll see what comes out of that. Okay, I think I found the first missed operation here. Let me just read a little section. This is early in the manual. Vertical mode switches. That's all of these guys here. Channel 1. There's the input I have on it still. And channel 2. There's nothing on it. This is channel 2. When you have all these buttons out, instead of the screen going blank, it just puts a straight line across the middle, which you can do nothing to. It doesn't respond to any adjustments. And I think the idea there is that's to tell you as a technician that you haven't pushed any of these buttons yet, and to get something on the screen so you don't miss the on LED and leave the unit running because you blanked the screen and didn't realize that it's actually still operating. I think that's why that's there. Here's what it says. When all buttons are out, a single trace will be displayed, provided that either trigger mode is in auto or trigger mode is in normal, with a triggerable signal applied to a vertical input connector. This trace will not display intelligence, not affected by any position controls. That's this trace here. It's not affected. So it's talking about this control here, these settings here. So it says, it's just a little bit vague. It says it will show when the auto is pushed, or it will show when the normal is pushed, and a triggerable signal is sent to one of the inputs. Well, here we are. Triggerable signal is there. No trace. No trace under any circumstances. So I think this is exhibiting exactly the problem I'm after. So that's the first signs of trouble based on reading through this very, very long and detailed document here. Okay, next thing to try, and by all means, I could be doing things wrong here, is to try using an external trigger source. So I'm going to move the signal we were looking at over to the external trigger in, something I've never used. I'm going to move this down to external trigger. I'm going to push one of these buttons. No, yeah, we're going to push the one that says A trigger view. Well, my understanding is that this should now show on the screen the trigger signal. I guess so you can take a look at what's on the trigger input in case things aren't working out for you. But there's nothing here. So can we make a trigger in some circumstance here? Just by doing anything and everything. And the answer is no. Cannot get anything to trigger up here. Now I don't actually have another signal coming in. I wonder if you need one to make a trigger. I need a second signal into here. I need multiple signal generators going to do this. I think not. I think when I have this button pushed here, then we're just looking at this input. That's what I believe the scope is doing, and it's just showing nothing. It's pointing at trigger amplifier, if there is something it's called that, and certainly some trigger circuitry is not working out here, I would think. Okay, carry on further. Okay, here's something a little bit unexpected. Nothing to do with the trigger, here's a bandwidth limit. So this limits the scope to 20 megahertz. I guess the reason is you don't want to see the stuff above it, above 20 megahertz, I guess. Put it in. It says in the instructions that doing this is not enough. You have to do it again. That seems very odd to me. I have trouble believing that. There wouldn't be anything apparent either. Certainly, I would normally think that you turn it on, you turn it off. That just doesn't make sense what I read here. Let me just read it again. Read it out loud. 20 megahertz bandwidth limit. Full when clicked out. Limits the bandwidth of the vertical amplifier to approximately 20 megahertz when pressed in. Push button must be depressed and released a second time to regain 100 megahertz bandwidth operation. I think all it's saying is you have to put this is the second time. Yeah, okay, I was misinterpreting that. It's just a straightforward switch. You're making too big a deal of it here. Okay, I'll carry on. Okay, a couple more switches to consider. So in auto mode, and I'm going to move this back over here so we have something to look at. Okay, where did that center line come from? You can have the trigger view on at the same time. Okay. So what it says is, in auto mode, if there's no trigger, if the signal is not suitable for triggering, the sweep will run free like it is right now. If you have it in normal mode, then you'll only see a display when the scope is triggering. And of course we never see a display because the scope is never triggering on here. I need the display smaller. That's a little too small. Let's try that. But no, it's not going to trigger. And in the single sweep mode, you can trigger a single sweep. Where is it? Make the display so it's bigger. So this doesn't trigger a sweep either. I'm just lucky that auto will allow the display to show when the scope is not triggering. Otherwise, I'd get nothing on the scope ever. There's some interesting patterns in the camera. That's not quite what I'm seeing. You're seeing more on there than I'm seeing. Okay, onward. And I think an important thing for me is to realize the operation of all these controls, which I have never actually studied so carefully. I know all these controls, so that's what's going to happen this time through, especially these trigger controls. So this one down here, you see how this whole trigger area is kind of in a green color in the background? So anything that's in here has to do with trigger. So this has to do with trigger hold off. So what's happening is you're holding off the next triggering. Maybe you have a very complex wave here of some weird sort, and you really want to see the whole thing on the screen. But if you allow it to trigger in its normal way, it's only going to show you the first part because it's triggering on later parts of the same signal. So you'd advance this hold off. That's affecting the sweep rate. That's kind of curious. Go all the way to the very end there. So this is something that would normally be just sitting on norm. Normally on norm. I think it was sitting over here. Here it is on norm. Now, did that fix everything? Is that what I had been doing? No, I don't think so. Nothing is fixed. Okay, carry on to the next thing. Okay, next thing is the coupling switch here. So normal operation, you would have it in this AC position like I have it now, and what's happening is the trigger signal is making its way to the trigger circuits through a capacitor. So no DC is getting into the triggering system. If you put it on low frequency reject, then as you might imagine, it won't trigger on low frequencies, they're being suppressed. If you put it on, I can't remember the frequency change now. If you put it on high frequency reject, it's no longer going to trigger on certain high frequency components of a signal. And DC lets everything go through. Let's try this. And we just tried it. And it didn't help. Not helping. Put it on norm. Put it on DC. And no, it's just never triggers. This DC setting, the capacitor that's used, or capacitors that are used in these settings, are gone. Didn't make any difference though. Okay, put it back like that. Let's keep going here. Okay, so there's another whole sweep system in here, delayed sweep. It's something I've never utilized. I don't really have any experience with it. It took me quite a while to spot how to activate it. So here's the regular A sweep that we would normally use. Here's a very similar set of controls for the B sweep, or the delayed trigger. Now I don't know how well this is going to come across on the camera. To activate it, delayed sweep, pull. Below here it says lock knobs for A. Must mean the A sweep. Right now the knobs are locked. And there you can see that this black thing is traveling with the white part. But if I pull this out, now I can rotate this knob. I guess what's happening is I'm setting the sweep rate for this trigger, I think. Not 100% sure what I'm doing here. If we rotate this back so they line up again, then they will start moving together. Pull it out. Here's the observation. Now you can see the line right there. See it moving? I'm not sure. I'll read more and find out, but perhaps this is the actual amount of delay here. 5 microseconds. I'm not sure, because we also have this adjustment. You can see something moving across. So something is being triggered here. Put this down to trigger on channel 1, which is the input from over here. You can actually see a sine wave in there. If you look carefully at it, you can see the trigger point going up and down. So it would look to me like the delayed trigger is operating. It's very hard to see. Let me slow down the signal here a little bit. It's way down, 100 hertz. Let's go 1,000 hertz. We're running at 500 hertz actually, is what we're running at. So we'll put these together. There we go. Okay, just check the trigger down here. Nothing. It's on auto. Source is normal. Source is channel 1. No triggering at all. So now we'll engage the delay. Now I can't really see anything in there. Fool with the trigger. Oh my gosh, here comes my cat. We're set on channel 1. Set it on norm. It's not doing. I'm not sure what I'm doing because I have no experience with this, utilizing this kind of feature here. Okay, but there seemed to be some difference in the triggering. Yeah, that's what's actually being sent to the oscilloscope. That should trigger and freeze, but it won't. Yes, Mr. Peanut. What are you talking about? Interesting, the switch causes a jump in the display. No triggering. Okay, so that's a delayed trigger, and if these things are not lined up, then the B trigger is engaged somehow. Oh, looks like Peanut just gave up on me. Okay, onwards. Read some more. Okay, as I mentioned, I'm not that familiar with using a delayed sweep, but so these buttons are about the horizontal display. And with the A button pushed, the display will be triggered by the A triggering settings, and there's nothing happening. I think all this time it's been like that. Buttons have been out. There's A in. No triggering. That should be pretty much the same. So still no triggering happening. Then we start to see the B trigger response. And if I push this bottom button, all it shows is the B. That's pretty interesting. I mean, that's triggered. You can see the trigger point moving on it. The funny steps in this signal may be coming from the signal generator. I'm not sure of that. So there's a triggering right there. I can slow this down, or maybe I'll speed up the signal. Again, my familiarity with this isn't all that great. But look at that. I can get a triggered view of the signal. Unfortunately, I'm using this delay thing here. See the effect of it. This would be much more in line with looking at digital signals and trying to figure out the time period of the signal, the square, most likely square signal you're looking at, I think. But there we are anyway. I'm not sure why it looks like that. I don't know why we have all this hash out here. Put some filters on. Didn't do anything. So now, is that another problem? Maybe with this. That's channel 2, nothing there. That's external, nothing there. That's normal. Normal apparently triggers on whatever's on the screen. So I guess if you have both A and B on the screen, the larger one is going to cause the triggering, I think. I'm not sure. So I get some kind of triggered result. It also means the trigger circuits for this part of the scope are working differently than this part. So this part's doing something a little bit different. Okay. Well, it's something. Anyway, making the observations I need to make before I start any kind of serious troubleshooting here. So I've gone through the rest of the manuals looking for more things I can do to make observations, and there's really nothing else that's going to be helpful, I'm pretty sure. But let's take a look at this diagram here. So this is the block diagram of the oscilloscope. And down here are the see, channel 1 input, channel 2. You can see a signal coming down out of this vertical switching logic coming down into here. A trigger generator, and below it is the B trigger generator. Now, this appears to be working from my observation, somewhat weak observation, but I believe this is working. If this is working, this must be working, all this stuff must be working if we can see the proper effect on the screen based on my experimenting earlier. So that kind of suggests that the problem is in here, this trigger generator. Oh, I just made a very interesting observation. Now what you're seeing through the camera, these little half circles or funny circles here, that's not visible with my eye. That's an effect of the camera. What's on here is just a somewhat flickering image of a sine wave going across. But to me, it just looks like a green box flickering a little bit. But the interesting observation is I was just walking in here from down the hall. I can see the scope here from down the hall in my house. And from a distance, I can see the traveling sine wave. But up close, I just see a rectangle here. That's kind of interesting. Not exactly sure why that is. And as my eyes dart around, as all of our eyes do, there are times where it freezes the screen briefly and I can see the sine wave. And that's something that I'm sure you've experienced too, just by moving your eyes around. But from a distance, I can see the sine wave going across. Isn't that interesting? I think so. Now what's less interesting is that I've gone through most of the rest of the service manual quickly, looking for any hints or ideas or whatnot, and I'm left thinking, boy, this is way out of my lane. I mean, there's no vacuum tubes inside here at all. It's a highly digitized scope, as you would imagine. And how am I ever going to find out what's going wrong? You know, jeepers creepers. But I am going to go to the next step, which is to take the cabinet off. We'll look inside and see what's in there. And maybe I'll be lucky and there'll be a smoked part I can spot. Maybe I'll be lucky. Otherwise, there's extensive methods described for testing internal signal levels of all sorts, and somewhere in there is going to be instructions on how to go through the trigger, go through the trigger circuits. But am I up to it? I don't think so offhand. But let's get the cabinet off. We'll take a look inside and see what's to be seen. Okay, in order to get the machine out of its cabinet, I had to take off all four of these cable rack extensions, I guess you would call them, and two more screws, one here and one here. And that should allow the scope to come out the front. Let's find out. Oh no. It's a little bit disappointing. There we go. The big power transformer here. There we are. Oh boy. Yeah, there's a reason why I like to fix vacuum tube radios. It has something to do with simplicity. Oh boy. Okay, let's look it over here. A chance to clean up the air filter that's on the back of this unit too. Okay, just have to look at everything and find out what's not right. Sounds easy. Sure. Sure, just a part in there. So what I will be able to do is identify what board is what, and maybe what area of the board is of interest, and have a good look at it. There's the on-off switch on this long arm here. Hey, I figured that out. Yeah, the rest should be easy. Oh my gosh, look at all the adjustments in there. Could even be a poorly seated chip. These chips are in sockets here. It could be just about anything. It could be a diode. Could be just about anything. Did I say that already? Well, it's going to be one of these parts. Yeah. Okay, so I'm just looking it over to get familiar with, to lay my eyes on it so I can get a look at it. What's all this stuff? Files more adjustments here. Delicate materials. Caution. Okay. Yeah, caution. Caution is the name of the day. So I think that's the end of the video for today. How do you get that out? Exactly what I'm going to do next for this, I don't know. Put the cabinet back on and just accept. It's not going to use the B delay trigger, and because it's of no consequence if the triggering is delayed a bit, that's not the end of the world. So I did manage actually to discover something quite useful. Okay, well, thanks a lot for watching, and I will spend my day pondering what to do next with this. See ya.